At least we can all agree that the third film in a trilogy is always the worst. That was a phrase that director Bryan Singer used in this film to highlight just how bad Brett Ratner's X-Men The Last Stand was. However, could that phrase also be applied to X-Men Apocalypse? I'm Tommy Bowyer from Move Rewind, and without further ado, let's get into it. X-Men Apocalypse was released in 2016. It was directed by Bryan Singer and it is the third film in the X-Men prequel series. And going into this film, there was of course a lot of hype, a lot of excitement. Everyone was looking forward to this film. However, from a personal view, I was very nervous because X-Men does not have a good record when it comes to the third film in a series. The Last Stand was very disappointing, and because First Class and Days of Future Past were exceptional films, I mean top standard, I was always concerned that I would be disappointed about X-Men Apocalypse, and in my opinion I was correct about that. I would say that X-Men Apocalypse is the weakest X-Men film that Bryan Singer has directed to this date. There's a lot of reasons why. I'm going to talk about a couple of details of this film and why I think it's just not as good as some that came before it. So, the characters in this film, they're pretty underdeveloped, I would say. Now, Professor X, his basic story arc in this film is to fall in love with Moira McTaggart from X-Men First Class, because of course he wiped her memory, so now he's trying to get back with her. And I really don't care a lot about this relationship. It was fun and exciting in First Class. It felt like it reached a natural end at the conclusion of that film. However, just kind of rehashing the same stuff really undermines the ending of First Class in terms of that relationship. So Professor X doesn't really go through a lot. He becomes bald. That's probably the most that actually happens to him in terms of consequences. So that's something, I suppose. Mystique, very, very disappointed with Mystique in this film because I feel like they didn't really have a lot to do with her character. It felt like they wanted her there because everyone loves Mystique and she is a cool character. It's just not a lot happens. She kind of becomes more invested in the X-Men as a project and becomes less demented that humanity should become extinct. So that is something, I suppose, that's character development. Not very strong though. And as for Magneto, who was a really great and complex character in the first two films, kind of just goes over the same stuff again. He loses his family, he turns against humanity, and then he gets a bit of redemption near the end of the film. We've seen stuff like that before, so it doesn't really have the same impact. The problem with the character development in this film is it really does feel like they're rehashing the same stuff. Oh, and by the way, as for the villain Apocalypse, hardly developed whatsoever. He's basically just big bad monster who's big villain, you know, big villain for the film. He doesn't really have any development though. He's not very compelling as a villain. So I would give the character development a 5 out of 10 because really I just feel like they're rehashing the same stuff and it's very disappointing. The performances are actually a ray of sunshine because I couldn't actually criticise any of the performances because the majority of them are alright. James McAvoy, Jennifer Lawrence, Michael Fassbender, it's what we would expect by this point. They're very well suited to their roles and they give strong invested performances. A lot of the actors who are brought on to play younger versions of the X-Men, such as Jean Grey and Cyclops and Storm, they're okay, you know, their performances are nothing bad. I couldn't really criticise them at all. Oscar Isaacs as Apocalypse, now that is something that I think could have been done better. It's not Isaac's performance, it's more Apocalypse as a character and how he is written. That is the main issue, just because he's not very compelling as previously stated. So that does affect Apocalypse as a character. No real criticism of Isaacs as an actor. actor though. So the performances, I'm going to give them an 8 out of 10 because they're all very well suited to their roles. I couldn't really pick out a bad performance. It's more the script, which means that some of the actors, such as Oscar Isaacs, can't really do a lot with their characters. The effects are extremely positive. You know, there's no real problem with effects. I wouldn't expect any problems with effects at this point because, of course, this film was released in 2016, so they couldn't exactly say that, oh, we didn't have the technology to do CGI. There's not a lot of practical effects in this film. I'm a fan of practical effects, so that's a little disappointing. There's no real problem with the effects. I mean, the final battle scene is just kind of a massive big CGI battle, which, you know, we're used to by this point with comic book films. Feel like they could have been a bit more creative with some of the effects used by Apocalypse and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. No, they're basically nitpicks though. There's nothing really wrong with the effects in this film. So I'm going to give the effects a 9 out of 10 because, what can I say? The effects are good, you know, I'd expect that though. Where this film goes wrong is the story, because it's just a little bit all over the place and it feels like we've seen a lot of this stuff done before. So the main premise of this film is Apocalypse, the first and most powerful mutant there is, coming back, awakening, being resurrected from the dead, and his main purpose is to wipe out all of humanity so that mutants can flourish. We have seen this done before. It's the premise of a lot of X-Men films, so it doesn't really make Apocalypse a very compelling villain with a compelling plan. The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, who are the mutants that Apocalypse chooses to be his inner circle and minions, what's all that about? They were a waste of time. Apart from Magneto, the rest are not very interesting whatsoever. They're kind of just there to look cool and provide an obstacle for the X-Men. Apart from that, they don't really have much of a purpose. So that was a massive mistake. They should have done more with the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The X-Men don't really do a lot in this film. You know, they try and stop Apocalypse. That is it. And of course, one thing which Bryan Singer really shoehorned in was a massive section of the film is set at Alkali Lake, where we go through Wolverine's origin story, how Bryan Singer would have done Wolverine's origin story. And while it is interesting to see, I really do feel like Bryan Singer was just trying to show off by this point and basically say, look, if I had done Wolverine's origin story, this is how I would have done it. So it kind of feels a little bit shoehorned in and just Bryan Singer showing off. I'm probably wrong about him showing off, but it did kind of come across like that on screen. Honestly, the film story is pretty underwhelming. It's stuff that we have seen done before. And the villain, it is the villain which makes this film struggle in terms of story. So I'm going to give the story and writing a 6 out of 10. Because while it is exciting, like, it's fun to watch, the action scenes are enjoyable, the dialogue's witty and funny, it's just very underwhelming as a story overall. So for this film's special recognition, I've said it a lot in this review, I'm going to talk about the villain, because a movie is as good as its villain. You know, great films throughout history have had great and memorable villains, and Apocalypse is not one of them. Now, he's supposed to be the first and most powerful mutant ever, and he doesn't come across as that on screen. I think it's always a problem when you have a villain who's supposed to be the biggest and the best. It's sometimes when you see them on screen, they're pretty underwhelming. And I think that's what happens with Apocalypse. He was so hyped up going into this film that he really didn't live up to that hype. I think one of the main problems is they don't give him enough screen time to really develop as a villain. You don't really understand why he's doing what he's doing. He just wants humanity wiped out. That's about it. Apart from that, there's nothing more there. And he's pretty easily defeated. I mean, when he's in the final battle scene, yes, the stakes, I suppose, are quite high. He's pretty easily vanquished, though, so he's kind of, well, he's not exactly that tough, then, if he can be defeated by a couple of mutants. So I would say the main problem with this film is down to its villain, because Apocalypse is just not very memorable and not very compelling. So I'm going to give the special recognition a 5 out of 10, because you need to get your villain right if you're going to make a great film. And X-Men Apocalypse did not get that villain right. So in conclusion, X-Men Apocalypse, you've heard me say it a lot in this review, was bitterly disappointing. While the performances are on point, the actors are well suited to their roles, and the effects are great, the main problem is what this film is named after, the villain Apocalypse. He is not compelling, he doesn't come across that powerful, and it's his weaknesses which drag this film down from being a great film. Bryan Singer was right in his assessment that the third film in a series is always the worst, because X-Men Apocalypse is the worst. It doesn't do anything to build on what happened in First Class and Days of Future Past. It just rehashes what happened in those two films. And the Wolverine origin story feels really shoehorned in. So overall, I would have to give X-Men Apocalypse a 34 out of 50, which gives it a grade 3 ranking. Honestly, I'm not a massive fan of X-Men Apocalypse. I have heard people say that they love this film, so, you know, it's just an opinion, of course. You can love this film. Just for me personally, it's just one of the weakest ones. So thanks for watching, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed my X-Men Apocalypse movie review. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. And of course, I only have one X-Men review left to do, and that is my Logan movie review, which is, of course, Hugh Jackman's last film as Wolverine, and what a treat that film is. I'm really looking forward to reviewing that film. So I hope you enjoy that, and I will see you in another one. See ya!